He had always loved exploring places that others forgot. There was something about walking where people once lived, worked, or traveled, but now nature had taken back. This time he had a map, old and tattered, showing trails through a thick forest far from the nearest road. The forest had a reputation for being dense and difficult to cross, but it was exactly the kind of place he liked. The deeper he went, the more he felt like he was stepping into a world that had paused long ago. The path was not really a path at all. Vines curled over fallen branches, and thick moss covered the stones under his feet. Birds called somewhere above, hidden among the leaves. The smell of damp earth and old leaves filled the air. Every so often he had to duck under branches or push aside ferns that seemed eager to reclaim the space. The map indicated something unusual up ahead. He didn't know what he was about to find, but there was a strange feeling of anticipation in his chest. After walking for hours, stepping over roots and slipping in patches of mud, he noticed a strange shape among the trees. At first he thought it was a shadow or perhaps the trunk of a very large tree, but as he got closer, it became clear it was something much bigger. His heart skipped a beat. There, partially hidden by the forest, was the bow of a massive ship. Its metal hull was rusted and streaked with dark orange lines, but it was unmistakably a cruise ship, the kind he had only seen in pictures or on the water. He stopped a few meters away, trying to take it all in. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if it were waiting for him to decide what to do next. He had seen abandoned buildings and old factories, but a cruise ship in the middle of the forest was something entirely different. How had it gotten here? How long had it been sitting in this place, slowly being swallowed by trees and vines? The questions raced through his mind. The ground around the ship was uneven, littered with fallen branches, broken glass, and debris from the ship itself. Rusted pieces of metal jutted out like broken teeth. Curiosity pulled him closer. Each step he took made the forest feel quieter, almost as if the bird calls and rustling leaves had stopped to watch him move. He ran his hand along the cold, corroded metal. The surface was rough, and the smell of rust filled his nose. The windows were shattered or clouded with dirt, making it impossible to see inside from where he stood. Some of the doors were hanging on broken hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze. Every detail suggested that this ship had been abandoned for decades. He circled the bow slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile ground. There were marks in the mud near the ship, footprints from animals, but also some that seemed human. Maybe other explorers had been here before him, or perhaps scavengers. The idea didn't frighten him. It made the place feel alive, like it had stories to tell. He could imagine the conversations, the laughter, and the excitement that must have filled this ship long ago, contrasting sharply with the silence and decay now. Looking at the trees growing through parts of the deck, he realized how long the ship had been here. Nature had claimed it slowly, sending roots through the metal and covering the upper decks with moss and leaves. Small plants were already growing inside through cracks in the floor. Birds had built nests in corners, and insects crawled over surfaces that humans had once walked. It was strange, almost magical, to see something made for the ocean now blending seamlessly with the forest. He moved toward the side of the ship, where the forest thinned slightly. Here the details were clearer. A lifeboat hung at an angle, its ropes frayed and snapping. Railings were bent and rusted, paint peeling off in long strips. The deck had a layer of dirt and leaves, and every step he took made the boards creak. He could see parts of cabins from this angle. Curtains faded and torn hung limply in broken windows. It was quiet, but the quiet felt heavy, as if the ship itself was holding memories too fragile to speak aloud. The explorer's mind wandered to the people who might have once been on this ship. Families with children, couples on vacations, workers maintaining the vessel. Now it was empty, abandoned, and forgotten. He crouched down and picked up a small piece of debris, a rusted fragment that might have once been part of the railing. Holding it, he could almost imagine the hands that touched it long ago, the voices and laughter, now replaced by the sound of the wind through the trees. He decided to take a closer look at the entrance. There was a hatch slightly ajar, as if inviting him inside. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was safe. The metal around it was corroded and the hinges looked weak. The wind blew softly, pushing the hatch slightly, creating a squeaking sound that echoed strangely in the forest. He steadied himself, took a deep breath, and pushed it open just enough to slip inside. Inside, the air was different. It smelled of damp metal, mold, and something he couldn't quite identify, perhaps the mixture of decay and time. The light was dim, coming through cracks and broken windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Every corner seemed alive with shapes that could be anything: old furniture, rusted equipment, or just tricks of the light. He moved carefully, placing each foot deliberately, aware that one misstep could send him through rotted wood. The interior was like stepping into another world. Rows of cabins stretched down narrow corridors. Doors hung open, revealing rooms with decayed furniture and belongings left behind. He could see sheets turned yellow with age, pillows flattened and torn, and the occasional personal item like a book or a photo lying on the floor. It was haunting, a museum of ordinary life frozen in time. He felt a strange connection to the people who had been here, their stories whispered through the objects they left behind. He walked slowly, touching the walls lightly, careful not to disturb anything. Every step brought more questions. How did the ship end up in the middle of a forest? Why had no one removed it or salvaged it? The mystery weighed on him, making his heart beat faster with both excitement and unease. He found a staircase leading to what used to be the main deck. Peering up, he could see sunlight filtering through holes in the ceiling, dust floating in the beams like tiny stars. He climbed carefully, gripping the railing that barely held together. On the deck, he paused. The view was surreal. From this height, he could see the forest stretching endlessly, green and thick. The ship, enormous and out of place, seemed almost like a forgotten monument swallowed by nature. The wind whistled softly, and for a moment he felt completely alone. Yet the ship was alive in its own way, holding memories and secrets, inviting him to explore further. He wandered across the deck, examining lifeboats, railings, and rusted vents. Every detail added to the story: faded paint suggesting luxury, broken glass hinting at sudden neglect, and small signs of life slowly reclaiming the space. Birds darted in and out of openings, and somewhere below a small animal scurried, disappearing into the shadows. The silence, broken only by creaks and distant calls, was both calming and eerie. Eventually, he sat down on a rusted bench, leaning against the railing. He took a deep breath and tried to imagine the ship in its prime, full of people laughing, music playing, and the gentle rocking of waves. The contrast between that lively past and the quiet, decayed present was overwhelming. He felt both awe and sadness, realizing how quickly time could erase human ambition and presence. For a long while, he simply sat, taking it all in. Every part of the ship told a story, and yet, so much remained a mystery. He knew he had found something extraordinary, something that would stay with him forever. The forest had hidden this giant, and he was among the few to witness it, to feel its weight and its silence. As the sun began to dip lower, casting golden light through the trees, he reluctantly prepared to leave the deck. He wanted to explore more, but he also knew he needed to be careful. The forest could be unforgiving, and the ship itself was unstable. Still, the memory of this first encounter, the shock of seeing a massive cruise ship abandoned in the middle of a forest, would remain vivid in his mind, fueling both curiosity and caution for the days to come. After his first encounter with the ship, the explorer knew he had to see more. He had walked around the outside and climbed the deck, but the inside remained a mystery. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he approached the partially open hatch again. The air around the entrance smelled damp and earthy, mixed with the sharp tang of rust. Each step closer made his heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the anticipation of discovering what time had left behind inside. He carefully pushed, the hatch open wider this time, just enough to slip his body through. The darkness inside was almost complete, except for the thin beams of sunlight piercing through cracks and broken windows. Dust floated in the light, moving slowly as if suspended in time. He flicked on a small flashlight he always carried, the beam cutting a narrow path ahead. The sound of his own breathing echoed softly, bouncing off walls and metal surfaces, making the space feel even larger than it was. The corridor he entered was long and narrow. Rusted handrails lined one side, peeling paint and scratches showing the ship's age. The floor creaked with every step, warning him to move slowly. Broken glass crunched under his boots and tiny animals scuttled away at the sound. He noticed the air getting colder as he went further in, and the smell of mildew grew stronger. Everything here felt frozen, caught between the past and the present. Cabins lined both sides of the corridor. He stopped in front of the first one, hesitating before opening the door. The room inside was small but once elegant. A bed frame leaned against the wall, its mattress long rotted away. Curtains hung limply from broken rods, faded from years of sunlight filtering through shattered windows. On the floor, a scattering of papers and a torn photograph caught his attention. Kneeling down, he picked up the photo carefully. It showed a group of people smiling, standing on the deck of the ship long ago. Their clothes were old-fashioned, their faces bright with joy. Seeing this made him pause. These were real people, once full of life, and now their memory remained here, quietly decaying. He moved on, opening other doors. Each cabin told a different story. In one, a child's toy lay in the corner, a small wooden boat covered in dust. In another, a suitcase lay open, clothes long disintegrated, leaving only buttons and scraps of fabric. Every item made the explorer feel closer to the people who had once lived here. It was haunting, but not in a frightening way. It was a reminder of how quickly time moved on, and how easily life could be forgotten. As he walked further, he reached the main lounge. The space was huge compared to the narrow corridors, with large windows facing what would have been the sea in the past. Now the windows looked out onto thick forest, trees pressing against the glass, branches scratching at the panes. The room had once been luxurious, with plush chairs and polished wood, but now it was a mix of decay and neglect. Dust covered. Every surface and pieces of furniture were broken or overturned. He ran his hand along a table, feeling the grooves of scratches and the flaking wood beneath his fingers. The lounge gave him a strange sense of peace. Despite the emptiness and ruin, there was beauty here too. Sunlight filtered in, highlighting patterns in the dust and casting long shadows. The explorer could almost hear echoes of laughter and conversation, a faint memory of the life that had once filled this place. He imagined families playing games, couples enjoying drinks, and musicians playing softly in a corner. The contrast between the past and present made the space feel alive in a way he hadn't expected. He decided to move toward the lower decks, wondering what secrets they might hold. The staircase leading down was narrow and steep, with metal steps rusted in places. Each step groaned under his weight, threatening to give way at any moment. He held onto the railing tightly, careful not to slip. At the bottom, he found a long hallway lined with doors, many of them hanging loosely on their hinges. Some had been forced open, perhaps by scavengers, while others remained shut, holding whatever remained inside. One room caught his attention immediately. The door was ajar, and a faint light from his flashlight revealed stacks of papers and documents scattered across the floor. He stepped inside carefully, avoiding the weak patches of floor. The papers were yellowed and brittle, some with writing still legible. He picked up one and read a few lines, discovering notes about maintenance schedules and logs of the crew's activities. There were also personal notes, small diary entries, expressing frustration, longing, or hope. He felt a chill as he read them, realizing he was holding pieces of someone's private life, long forgotten and left to decay. He moved on, discovering more personal belongings. A coat hung on a hook, covered in dust but still intact. Shoes, worn and faded, sat in corners. Small mementos, like a locket or a bracelet, lay in drawers or on the floor. Every object felt like a story waiting to be told. He carefully documented what he found with his camera, wanting to remember everything without disturbing the fragile environment too much. In one corner of the hallway, he noticed markings on the wall, etched into the metal long ago. Numbers, dates, and small drawings hinted at people trying to leave messages, maybe to each other, maybe to themselves. It was strange and humanizing, seeing these small acts of communication frozen in time. He ran his fingers over the scratches, thinking about the person who had made them. What were they feeling? Were they scared, bored, or simply marking time in a lonely place? As he explored further, he began to notice subtle sounds he hadn't heard before. A faint drip of water echoed somewhere deeper in the ship, and the metal groaned under its own weight. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a scurry of movement, like an animal moving between walls or under floors. It made him pause, holding his breath for a moment, ears straining. The sounds reminded him that while humans had abandoned this place, life still moved on in small ways. Rats, birds, or other creatures had made this their home. The thought both unsettled and fascinated him. Eventually, he reached what had once been the ship's dining area. Long tables stretched across the room with chairs overturned and broken. Rust covered the metal legs and the wooden surfaces had rotted in many places. Plates and cutlery, tarnished and dusty, were scattered across the floor. He picked up a small, cracked plate and turned it over in his hands. It felt heavy, a reminder that even objects made to be used and enjoyed could become relics, holding the weight of history. He took a moment to sit at one of the tables, leaning back against a chair that had somehow survived the decay. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of metal and the distant sound of something moving in the shadows. He thought about the people who had once sat here, sharing meals, laughing, arguing, celebrating. The contrast between the life that had filled this space and the emptiness now was striking. It made him reflect on the passage of time and how quickly even the grandest places could be forgotten. After a while, he moved toward what had been the captain's area. This part of the ship felt more private, more deliberate. He found papers, charts, and logs, all yellowed and fragile. Some were damaged by water or mold, but enough remained to give a glimpse into the daily operations of the ship. The handwriting was precise, neat, careful. It spoke of responsibility, duty, and sometimes worry. He could almost feel the presence of the captain, walking these halls long ago, overseeing the ship, solving problems, guiding people. He lingered here longer than in any other part of the ship. There was a sense of authority and care in the space, a reminder that behind every abandoned object and every decayed room had been someone responsible, someone human. The explorer felt a connection not just to the people who had been on the ship, but to the human experience itself, the hopes, the fears, the work, and the joy that filled lives, even if only for a short time. As the sun began to dip lower outside, casting long shadows through the broken windows, he realized he had spent hours inside. Time seemed to move differently here. The forest outside had changed subtly while he was inside. The light shifted, leaves glowed golden, and the air grew cooler. He knew he needed to leave soon, but there was still so much to explore. He made a mental note to return, to continue documenting and discovering. For now, though, he needed to step outside and breathe fresh air again, to let the reality of the forest and the ship sink in. Before leaving, he took one last walk through the corridors. Each step reminded him of the fragility of human presence, of how easily even grand creations could be left behind. He felt a mix of awe and respect for the lives that had intersected with this ship, for the memories frozen in time, and for the slow, relentless reclaiming by nature. As he emerged from the hatch, the sun warmed his face. The forest sounds filled his ears, and the sight of the massive abandoned cruise ship hidden among the trees struck him once more. It was surreal, unreal, and yet utterly real. He stepped back into the forest, leaving the ship behind for now, but carrying its stories, its mysteries, and its silent lessons with him. The experience had shaken him more than he expected, but it had also ignited a deeper curiosity. He knew that the ship had more secrets to reveal, and that he would return, ready to uncover the stories still hidden within its rusted walls. When the explorer returned the next day, he felt a mix of excitement and unease. The forest seemed quieter than before, almost as if it knew he was coming back. He followed the same path, pushing through thick vines and mud, each step familiar yet strange. The massive ship came into view again, half hidden among trees and undergrowth. From this angle, he noticed details he had missed before. The way the sun glinted on rusted rails, the way moss had spread like a soft green carpet over the deck, and the strange patterns the trees made as they grew around the metal. He took a deep breath and approached the hatch. Today he wanted to explore deeper into the ship, beyond the cabins and lounges he had seen yesterday. He had brought a small pack with tools, extra flashlight batteries, and notebooks to record everything. His mind buzzed with questions. Why had the ship ended up here? Who had abandoned it? What stories had been left behind? Every step felt heavier this time, filled with the anticipation of discovery. Inside, the air was colder than he remembered, and the smell of rust and mildew stronger. Dust swirled in the beams of his flashlight. The ship was quiet, but in a way that made him tense. Even though he had been inside before, it felt different now, as if it were watching him, aware of his presence. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile floors or objects scattered across the corridors. Each cabin and room had its own small treasures and stories, and he wanted to respect them, to uncover the history without destroying it. He made his way to a room he had only glanced at yesterday, the captain's quarters. The door was heavy and slightly warped, but he managed to push it open. Inside, the room felt more personal than any other part of the ship. A desk still stood in the corner, covered in old papers, charts, and a small rusted compass. Shelves lined the walls, holding books and binders that had survived the years. The explorer began carefully sifting through the papers, trying not to tear them. He found logs with dates and notes about daily operations, maintenance schedules, and lists of crew members. Some of the logs were unusual, containing personal reflections. One entry mentioned the challenges of keeping the ship running despite financial problems. Another described disagreements among crew members and worries about passengers' safety. The explorer could feel the weight of responsibility that had been placed on this person's shoulders. He imagined the captain pacing the floor at night, thinking about the ship, the passengers, and the crew. It gave the space a human warmth, contrasting with the cold metal and decay surrounding him now. He continued to search, finding small personal items, a pair of glasses, a fountain pen, and a neatly folded uniform. These objects made the history of the ship more tangible, more real. He paused to sketch a few in his notebook, wanting to capture the details before the decay erased them completely. Every object told a story, and he could feel fragments of the people's lives echoing in the silence. It was both fascinating and haunting. The explorer moved deeper into the ship toward an area he had not yet entered. This part of the vessel seemed less maintained, almost forgotten even before it had been abandoned. The floor was uneven, and the walls showed signs of water damage and rust. He shined his flashlight along the corridor, noticing the way light and shadow played across peeling paint and exposed pipes. In one small room, he found a chest half buried under debris. It was locked, but the metal had weakened over time, and he was able to pry it open. Inside the chest were more personal effects, photographs, letters, and trinkets that had been carefully stored and then left behind. One photograph showed a family on the ship's deck, smiling at the camera, unaware that the image would someday be all that remained. Letters were faded, some torn, but he could still make out words of longing, hope, and concern. He read a few aloud quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile paper. It felt as if the voices from the past were speaking directly to him. Further down the corridor, he discovered the engine room. This space was vast and intimidating, filled with massive machinery, rusted and still partially intact. Pipes ran across the ceiling and gauges were frozen in time, hands pointing to numbers that no longer mattered. The air here smelled of oil and rust, and he felt the weight of the ship's former purpose. This was where it had been kept alive, where the hum of engines had once filled the space, guiding the vessel through the oceans. Standing there, he could almost hear the faint echoes of machines and the murmur of crew members attending their duties. The explorer noticed graffiti etched into one of the metal walls. Some were names, dates, and initials, possibly left by crew members or previous visitors. Others were more cryptic, strange symbols or drawings that made him pause. He ran his fingers over the scratches, imagining the person who had made them. Why had they carved these symbols? Was it boredom, superstition, or just the human need to leave a mark? The small acts of expression connected him even more to the people who had once lived and worked here. As he moved further into the ship, he began to find signs of natural reclamation. Plants had broken through the floors, roots creeping into cracks in the metal. Small animals had made their homes in corners, leaving tiny footprints in dust. Birds had nested in what had once been luxurious lounges. It was remarkable how life persisted even in a space so completely abandoned. The explorer realized that the ship was no longer just a human artifact. It had become part of the forest, slowly transforming into something new. He found a stairwell leading even lower to the areas where the crew had lived and worked. These rooms were smaller, cramped, and less decorative, but full of evidence of daily life. Lockers with corroded locks, a small kitchen with rusted utensils, and beds with decayed mattresses told the story of the people who kept the ship running. He felt a deep respect for their efforts, imagining the long hours, the hard work, and the small joys that must have filled these spaces. In one corner, he discovered a small journal, bound in worn leather. He opened it carefully, and the handwriting inside was neat but hurried. The entries were personal, sometimes mundane, sometimes revealing deeper emotions. One page described a crew member's excitement about traveling to new places, while another expressed worry about leaving family behind. The explorer read each line slowly, feeling as if he were stepping into someone else's life, understanding their hopes and fears. It was a powerful reminder that the ship had been more than metal and machinery. It had been full of human experiences. Time passed quickly. The explorer became absorbed in the details of the ship, forgetting the hours outside. He moved from room to room, cataloging objects, reading logs, and taking photographs. Each discovery brought a mixture of fascination and melancholy. He could feel the weight of history pressing down. Yet there was also a strange joy in uncovering these stories before they disappeared completely. The ship was a puzzle, and he was slowly piecing it together. One object, one note, one memory at a time. At one point, he entered a room that had clearly been left in haste. Papers scattered across the floor, a chair overturned, and a suitcase half open suggested that someone had left suddenly, without time to gather their belongings. He examined the suitcase, finding personal items still inside, a watch, a scarf, and a few coins. It made him wonder why they had left so abruptly. Was it financial problems, a sudden storm, or something else entirely? The mystery gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into the ship's past. He decided to explore the upper deck again, curious about what he might find. Climbing the stairs carefully, he emerged into the open air. Sunlight poured through broken windows, illuminating rust and decay. From here, he could see the forest pressing against the ship, trees twisting around railings, branches reaching inside through gaps in the metal. The view was surreal. A massive vessel trapped between two worlds, the past of human ambition and the unstoppable force of nature reclaiming its space. On the deck, he noticed more personal items left behind by passengers. A torn book lay on a bench, a hat sat atop a broken railing, and a small rusted toy rolled slightly in the breeze. He picked up the toy and held it for a moment, thinking about the child who might have played with it, the laughter that had once filled this space. The connection to the past felt tangible, almost alive. It was more than history. It was human memory, preserved in the quiet decay. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the deck, the explorer sat down on a bench, exhausted, but exhilarated. He realized that he had uncovered only a fraction of the ship's secrets. Every object, every log, every mark told a story, and yet so much remained hidden. The forest had kept the ship safe in its own way, preserving the history while slowly erasing the details. He made a mental note to return, knowing that there were still rooms and areas he had not explored, mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Before leaving, he took one last walk across the deck. The wind blew softly through the broken railings, carrying the scent of the forest and the faint tang of rust. He looked at the ship with a mixture of awe and respect. It was a reminder of human ambition, fragility, and the unstoppable passage of time. The explorer felt shaken, humbled, and inspired all at once. The ship was no longer just a structure. It was a story, a memory, a monument to the lives that had passed through it. The explorer returned to the ship a few days later, carrying a small backpack with supplies, a camera, and extra flashlight batteries. He had thought he understood the vessel after his last visits, but an uneasy feeling had grown inside him. There was more to discover. He could feel it, and he wanted to uncover every secret before time and nature erased it completely. As he approached the massive hull, the forest seemed thicker, almost closing in around him, branches brushing against his shoulders and vines tangling around his boots. The rusted metal of the ship appeared darker under the overcast sky, as if warning him to proceed carefully. Pushing open the hatch, he stepped inside. The air was cold and heavy, filled with the smell of rust and damp wood. Dust swirled in the narrow beams of his flashlight. The silence was different this time. He felt watched not by a person but by the weight of the abandoned ship itself. Shadows danced across the walls, distorted by the light, and he had to remind himself to breathe slowly. The corridors felt tighter, narrower, as if the ship had grown more oppressive since his last visit. He moved toward the lower decks, where the crew quarters had been. Each step creaked ominously, and he was hyper-aware of the fragile floors beneath him. He passed cabins he had seen before, noticing details he had missed, scratches in the walls, tiny objects tucked into corners, and graffiti etched into the wood, some faded, some more recent. It was as if the ship was not entirely abandoned. Someone or something had been here. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but curiosity pushed him forward. In one hallway, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. A shadow shifted quickly behind a broken door. He froze, listening. There was nothing, only the sound of water dripping somewhere deep below. He shook his head, telling himself it was just his imagination. Yet the feeling lingered. Every creak, every rustle of metal, every tiny sound made him tense. The ship had secrets, and he was beginning to realize that some of them might not be entirely welcoming. He entered a cabin he had not fully explored before. The door hung loosely on its hinges, swaying slightly in the faint breeze. Inside, the room was small and cramped, the bed frame leaning to one side, mattress rotted away. He noticed something unusual, a small pile of objects that didn't seem decades old. A torn piece of fabric, a scuffed boot, footprints in the dust that were too fresh to have been there for years. The realization hit him. He was not the only one who had been exploring this ship recently. His heart beat faster, but he forced himself to stay calm. Curiosity outweighed fear, and he wanted to know more. He moved carefully down the corridor, flashlight scanning every detail. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows seemed alive, shifting and twisting as he moved. The ship, already eerie in its decay, now felt almost sentient, as if it were observing him. He reached a stairwell leading to the lower storage and mechanical areas. The metal steps groaned ominously, and he hesitated for a moment. He knew the structure was fragile, but the chance to explore these hidden areas was too tempting to ignore. At the bottom, the air was colder, damp, and filled with the smell of oil and rust. Pipes lined the walls, some broken, some dripping water slowly onto the floor. The machinery was massive, rusted, and partially collapsed. He walked carefully, noting the gauges frozen in time, the valves corroded and stuck, and the layers of dust covering everything. This was the heart of the ship, the place that had once kept it alive. Now it was a labyrinth of decay, shadows, and forgotten work. As he explored deeper, he found signs of previous human activity. Footprints, broken tools, and scraps of clothing suggested someone had passed through not long ago. The explorer felt a mix of fear and fascination. Whoever or whatever had been here was long gone, but the signs remained. He moved cautiously, making sure he could retrace his steps if necessary. Every sound was amplified in the narrow corridors. The drip of water, the distant groan of metal, the faint scuttling of something small and quick. He reached a small office-like room partially blocked by fallen beams. Inside, he found papers scattered across a rusted desk, some stuck to the floor with mold. Among them was a journal, leather-worn but intact. He opened it carefully. The entries were from a crew member, describing life aboard the ship before it had been abandoned. Some were mundane, daily chores, maintenance checks, schedules, but others were chilling. There were mentions of strange events, odd noises, and unexplained occurrences. Shadows moving where they shouldn't, items disappearing and reappearing, and a feeling that someone or something was watching. The explorer's heart raced as he read further. The entries suggested that the crew had felt uneasy long before the ship had been abandoned. One entry described a storm that had seemed unnaturally violent, threatening the ship even in shallow waters. Another mentioned disagreements and arguments that had escalated, as if the pressure of life aboard the ship had been amplified by something unseen. The writer hinted at fear, but the last entry was abrupt, unfinished, and smeared with water damage. It was impossible to tell what had happened, but the sense of dread was clear. He set the journal aside and continued exploring. The further he went, the more unstable the structure became. Floors were rotten, ceilings sagged, and pipes hung precariously. Every step was careful, every movement deliberate. The ship seemed alive with history and with danger. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision, shapes that could be animals or tricks of the light. The creaks of the metal were almost like whispers, telling stories he couldn't fully understand. He found another stairwell leading to the upper deck. Climbing it, he noticed the deck was in worse condition than before. Metal was corroded through in several places, and the wooden panels were soft and spongy. A sudden gust of wind rattled the broken railings, making him step back. As he looked around, he noticed the forest pressing against the ship, trees reaching inside through gaps in the metal. It was beautiful in a strange and dangerous way. Nature was reclaiming this massive structure, twisting it, reshaping it, and blending it into the forest as if it had always belonged there. On the deck, he saw more signs of life. Birds had nested in corners, small plants grew in cracks, and insects crawled across every surface. But there were also signs of human presence. Footprints, small scratches, and items left behind suggested someone had been here recently, exploring or scavenging. The idea of another person in the ship made him uneasy, but he pressed on, curiosity stronger than fear. He discovered a lifeboat that had once been neatly stored but now hung at a strange angle, ropes frayed and swinging. Underneath, he noticed marks on the deck, deep scratches and scuffing as if something heavy had been dragged. The marks led toward the edge of the ship, toward a part he had not explored before. He felt a chill. Something about the markings made the ship feel alive, threatening, almost warning him to turn back. But he couldn't stop. He followed the marks, stepping carefully, aware of every creak and groan beneath him. The corridor led to a small hidden room. Inside, the explorer found remnants of old belongings. A suitcase, a small box of personal items, and a few documents. The documents were official. Tickets, receipts, and papers that hinted at the ship's final voyage. Some were financial records suggesting that abandonment had been due to economic failure. Others were personal. Letters, notes, and a small photograph of a family smiling on the deck. Holding these, he felt a strange connection to the people, a mixture of empathy and sadness. They had left in haste or necessity, leaving behind pieces of their lives for the forest to claim. Suddenly he heard a sound. Soft, deliberate, almost like someone moving just beyond the wall. His heart raced. He froze, listening. The sound repeated, a scuffle, a shift in weight, and then silence. He knew he was alone, but the sound had been real enough to set his nerves on edge. He reminded himself to breathe, to stay calm, and to keep moving. Fear had its place, but curiosity was stronger. He would not let the ship intimidate him. He spent hours exploring the lower decks, documenting everything he could. Each discovery added layers to the story. Remnants of crew life, evidence of passengers, signs of nature reclaiming the space, and hints of recent human or animal presence. By the time he emerged to the main deck again, the sky was darkening, the forest around him muted in the fading light. The ship looked even more imposing in the shadows, rusted metal glinting faintly, silhouettes of broken railings and masts sharp against the twilight sky. He sat down on a bench, exhausted but exhilarated. The ship had revealed part of its story, but it had also reminded him of the danger, the fragility, and the mystery that lingered. Shadows, creaks, and rust had a voice of their own, telling stories he could only partially understand. He felt shaken not just by fear but by awe. The ship was more than an abandoned vessel. It was a monument to human ambition, to lives lived and forgotten, and to the unstoppable power of nature reclaiming what humans had built. As he prepared to leave, he looked back once more. The ship hidden in the forest was a strange blend of beauty, danger, and history. He knew that its secrets were far from fully uncovered. There were still rooms to explore, stories to piece together, and mysteries that might never be solved.